Well, hello and welcome again to Whisky and Cynicism. This is Desert Island Drams. I'm Simon Smith. I'm joined today by Mr. Hugh Barron from James Eadie. First of all, I guess we should say Happy New Year. This is going out on the 1st of January, so hope everyone had appropriate festivities in whatever ways means you could in the strange tier-based world we now live in. So I'm thrilled to welcome Hugh from one of my favourite independent bottlers in James Eadie. Hugh, how are you doing down there in London, mate? And also, what are you drinking?
Hi, Simon. Thanks very much for having me. London's all good. It's a bit wet and cold outside, so I've decided to go for a Coa Lila, one of our cask finishes. This one was being finished in Amontillado for 3 months, so yeah, just a winter warmer, really. Otherwise, life's all good. It's all good. Obviously, a happy New Year to everyone, and I hope a good New Year, whatever you did. But yeah, it's good to be on, mate. Thanks very much. Been watching a few of these and they're very entertaining. So thanks very much for asking me, and I'm looking forward to.
Oh, hopefully we can live up to that, especially if people are watching this with a slightly sore head. I'm on a highball, just as a nice refreshing one, because I think I was saying to you, I seem to be tripping over bottles and samples at the minute and can't really be asked choosing what I want to drink. So if all else fails, go for a highball. Now, I mean, I think I'll let you tell a bit, maybe the story a little bit more. I've actually covered it. I did a review of one of your whiskies a while back. James is kind of an interesting story of a figure from the 1800s whose brand and ideas have been kind of reinvigorated by a descendant, in fact, which is quite interesting. But I think within that, and feel free to give us a bit of a lowdown first on kind of where you think James Eadie sits. But as well as that, where do you think independent bottling sit at the minute? Like, I mean, how do you feel they are important? And what are they bringing to the whiskey industry just now?
I think it's a very exciting time for indies at the moment. I think a great appreciation has popped up, and that's obviously been led by Gordon MacPhail and all the old boys like Douglas Lang. But at the moment, I think we're sitting, as I said, in an exciting time in terms of quality for price. I think there's some fantastic drams, obviously limited edition drams as well, for the price you're getting, and then the experimentation side of everything, of cask finishing, that's sort of coming out of indies as well. And because it's all limited and batched, we can, because we're sort of bottling maybe 300 bottles a release, we can actually, put things into weird, wonderful casks, and if it works, it's great. And, it's not going to be too damaging if we don't, because, we can still sit on it. We don't need to churn out, thousand bottles of one release. We can still work within our sort of confines and give the drinkers and consumers some exciting drams for some good prices. So I think, and you can see the rise in independent bottlers recently, have been fantastic. And they all seem to be producing some lovely stuff. So yeah, it's a very good place to work, very good fun as well. So I think, yeah, the indies are sort of coming to the forefront now, which they haven't really done before.
I think it's quite important, actually, and I'm going to go really, for those at home, I send people ahead of these a bit of a running order, a few questions, and then almost immediately deviate and vaguely ambush the person on the other side, which I'm about to do to Hugh now. But I mean, I think, independent bottling is such an interesting thing. I think people maybe misunderstand it at times, and maybe aren't quite sure of the source of what theirs. I mean, the short answer is you're bottling, whiskey from bona fide single malt distilleries of exceptional quality, and you're bottling them under your own name. In James Eadie's case, as far as I know, always with a named distillery. Sometimes they're not named in other bottlers. They will not be able to for whatever reason, or they might be teaspoons, so they might be under a code name or a release name. But I think people sometimes are unsure of when in the process you come into it. So are you buying new make and filling it into your own casks? Are you buying casks and then bottling them? Are you buying casks, re-racking them and finishing them? So all are possible. But for James Eadie, I guess, with your finishes, for example, at what stage do you actually acquire that liquid, and then how much do you personally do to it afterwards?
That's a very good question. I mean, so we don't buy new make, so we don't have filling contracts. So some bottlers will have filling contracts with distilleries where they basically send in their casks, and then they fill it off the stills, and then they put it into their warehouse, and they can wait 20 years until they bottle. We're buying it at a younger age, so in between sort of 3 and 10 years. And as you say, then we decide what to do with it. So we have 3 releases. We have our small batch, which is where we take 2 to 4 casks from one distillery, and they tend to be refill and first fill bourbons. So that's to sort of just highlight the distillery character, so to speak. And you mentioned that we bottle distilleries that are probably less known. So Ben Rennes, Coalila. So these are all blending malts, so to speak. So it's great to sort of show that side of the distillery as a single malt. And then we've obviously got that single cask. So when we buy them and store them in our warehouse, when we sample them, there's just some that we are just lovely by themselves. Not saying that the small batch aren't lovely, you know, we're putting that sort of jigsaw together to bring out a lovely distillery character. So that single malt, you know, we've done a few recharred single casks because it's just quite a unique expression of that distillery. So we bottle those, and then you touched on our cask finish range, which is where we use wood that James Eadie used to use. So in his ledgers, he's basically told us what wood he used. Got his hands on everything, being sort of in the Victorian times, they saw any barrel, they put whiskey into it. So we do Madeira, a lot of sherry, I say PX, Oloroso, Amontillado. Palo Cortado is, you know, a personal favorite of mine. And that's where we take a refill cask from the distillery, and then we sort of sit down as a team and we discuss, you know, what cask finish would go well with that distillery character. So there is a lot that we could do within buying, you know, refill bourbon casks or first fill bourbon casks. We just play around and try and find the best combinations to it. So it's great fun. And some heated debates. So Rupert, who you mentioned, is James Eadie's great-great-grandson. He's a massive fan of Islay whiskies, but he's not a massive fan of sherry whiskey. So trying to get our Coalila into some Palo Cortado casks took a lot of debating, but you know, eventually he sort of let it go, and it's been great. So that's the fun side, because we can't really predict what it's going to taste like. It's sort of, you know, a bit of a blind guesswork, but it's amazing. And then when you see it, so, you know, we finished them in between sort of 3 months, and I think our oldest is 3 years. I think maybe the Ben Rennes that you reviewed was at 36 months. So within that, you see the development of the whiskey in the cask change. So yeah, that's control that we have. We don't have control of it off the stills, but we can play around with wood, which is, you know, as I said, it's a benefit of what we do, and it's just really, really good fun, because we do 2 releases a year, and then, you know, we've got different weird and wonderful whiskies coming out. So it's good. It's very good.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to impress on people there as well was, you know, you'll hear people talk about companies being good independent bottlers, and people have opinions on independent bottlers as a company, which might be somewhat confusing, as most of them aren't producing anything. And it might be easy to think, well, the best independent bottlers will be the ones with the most money, who can simply buy the best casks and the best whiskey and put it into a bottle. But there is a production side to being an independent bottler, as you've just said, Hugh, is that, you know, some of the finishing, some of the re-racking, a lot of the cask management is done by the bottler. So it's not simply a case of buying a cask, putting in a bottle, and if you can afford a better cask, you sell a better whiskey. So that they are, I guess, indeed, I'm sure you'll agree, are an important part of showcasing whiskey, not just simply bringing it to market.
Yeah, that absolutely. I guess, yeah, is the best way. As I said earlier, it's those distilleries that people might have not heard of before, like Dow Ewan, Inchgower, and you know, those blending malts. So to be able to put those into a bottle and then showcase them is a perfect word for it. It's just showing the components that go into blends, because a lot of the bigger companies, the big blending companies, they are using those whiskies to go into the big blends, which is fantastic. But then it's also great for people who love and enjoy whiskey to actually get to see them on their own. And we also, I mean, coming from us, you know, we're also bottling James Eadie's Trademark X, which has 14 whiskies in it. And so you've still got to buy those casks, and then we're blending those casks into our blend. So it's sort of a perfect sort of circle of sort of buying and putting it out there in all its different forms, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, there's people might think that brands, and what springs to mind, like Longmorn and Craigellachie, for example, are relatively new distilleries, where in fact they're distilleries with quite a lot of history. But what they've been used for in the past is mainly for blending. Some independent bottlers have brought some casks to market, Craigellachie especially in this. Their popularity has risen, and then the owners of those distilleries have then brought official bottlings to the fore.
Mm.
Which is, I mean, and Craigellachie especially has been as a cult favorite now for, you know, a lot of whiskey heads. So if it weren't for independent bottlers buying and bringing those casks to the fore, then we might not even see them at all in the official bottlings like that we see now. So are there some that we see indies of now that you think down the line you'd love to see them actually be brought out as a brand themselves?
Yeah, I again completely agree. I think another great example of that is probably Clynelish, which has risen hugely through the ranks. Now, you know, there used to be quite a lot of independent bottlings of Clynelish, but now its official bottlings are taking off. And yeah, I'm surprised that a few of them haven't already taken off. I think Benrinnes, obviously because of its distillation change, has always had a bit of an interest. But for me, I think Linkwood will be one that will go into the mainstream. I think it's a lovely Speyside distillery. And then you also see Caolila, which is, you know, a personal favorite of mine. But because, you know, it's another great example with Caolila. It's a factory. It's huge. You know, a lot of people think, you know, the smaller the distillery, the better the whiskey. Well, actually, Caolila proves that you can produce millions of litres of alcohol and still amazing. So I think Caolila, will grow even more, which is great. But yeah, I think Linkwood would be, if I was going to put money on, I think there'll be one that people will turn to more often. I mean,
yeah,
whiskey festivals, you know, you got massive fans of Linkwood. And I was at the Fife Whiskey Festival, and I think it was one of my first ever festivals, and we sort of just play into the industry and sort of understand it a bit more. And this person came up to me, and we just finished a Linkwood in PX, and this person came up to me and was asking me all these questions about Linkwood, and I was like, I could either sort of try and blag it, or, you know, I'll just be honest. And luckily, I turned around and I was like, oh, I'm not sure. I think he was asking about the distillation, and the guy turned to me and said, yeah, I'm the distillery manager of Linkwood. And then all these people were around him, who were all massive Linkwood fans. So I think that's got a bit of a following building. But what about you? I mean, you know, working where you work, do you see a certain distillery flies off the shelf?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, I mean, most of them have now got into, you know, kind of their official bottlings. You know, Mortlach was one that still flies off, but is now, as of a couple of years ago, being re-released under Diageo labeling. And of course, our mutual friend Conor O'Keefe heads up the Glenbergie Appreciation Society. For those on Facebook, the group's called What About Glenbergie? It's worth having a look at for the fans. But I mean, you know, I mean, I chuckled at it as well. But we've had a couple of indie Glenbergies recently, and they do really fly off between the Connoisseur's Choice and Canmore and stuff. And it's great liquid. And as this kind of became a bit of a running joke, I've been talking about Glenbergie more. And a lot of people I talk to, you know, established whiskey heads, guys in the shop, keep saying to me, I love Glenbergie. Every time we get a release, and I'm really interested. So I think whatever they're doing up in Forres seems to have captured the imagination a little bit. So I'd imagine there might be some folk with a sight on, I think Ballantine's have released one for an export market official bottling under Ballantine's kind of malt series, but I don't think we've seen a proper Glenbergie. So that's fingers crossed for the Glenbergie fans out there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think to kind of, I guess this might be an interesting one as well, because we're talking about independent bottlings and what you guys do with kind of moving casks around and that kind of still having that production side. So from that point of view, and from your kind of, I guess, again, unique view of the industry, what annoys you most about the industry, and what's the Well, what, do you have a particular bugbear, I guess, that you encounter regularly?
Well, for me, obviously, working as an independent bottler, we do single malts and the cask finishing side. But the main one is, I mean, is our trademark X, the blend, which is lovely. And I used to work in a whiskey shop, and I used to be sort of a single malt snob. And when I went for my interview with James Eadie, you know, Rupert asked me to try the blend, and in my head, I was like, oh, you know, it's my first job out of uni. My parents want me to leave home, so just say yes when you try it. And luckily, when I tried it, it was amazing. It was this sort of amazing flavour of sort of sweetness and smoke, and it's my first proper introduction to a blend other than Famous Grouse, which my grandfather used to drink. And then that sort of led me down the path of actually reading more about blends and understanding the industry and what blends are. So I would say my bugbear is the marketing and education side of blends, and that's from the industry point of view. I think because they were so popular, and obviously we have a rise of single malts, which is fantastic. I think the sort of people now don't concentrate on what's going on with blends. I mean, Compass Box has done a fantastic job of educating people. You know, North Star doing great stuff as well with their Star series, and you know, and then Johnny Walker's still, you know, still Johnny Walker. It's amazing, and that's great. You know, you guys up there in Edinburgh, you're in the Johnny Walker Centre. You're seeing the investment they're putting in, and they're linking it back to the blends, because you know, single malts are an ingredient for blends, and it's fantastic that we all have them. But a lot of people just, as soon as they hear the word blend, just go, I don't want to drink it. So it's having that understanding of actually good whiskey is good whiskey, and it's all about the flavour, and it's not necessarily about the marketing and the name, which, you know, could lead us on to sort of the pricing of whiskey as well, because some of them are quite expensive for you know, people who still want to drink them. You know, I think, but with blends, I think that's probably my bugbear, and you know, when I'm there and I'm sort of showcasing the whiskies, it's amazing when I don't have a single malt on the table. Our blend does really well if I have the blend and two malts, but as soon as I have the cask finishing and the sort of older whiskies that we do, the blend just gets overlooked. And you know, I'm in trouble before where someone's come over and like, can I try your single malts? And I pour the blend, and then can I try the blend? And then I pour the blend again. And they go, oh, you know, that was actually delicious. And so it's just the word blend sort of scares people, and I think it's definitely from an industry point of view is actually you should still look after blends. Don't fill it with 95% of young grain, but also sort of the education side of blends. And yeah, as I said, I think it's great what Johnny Walker are doing at the moment, and you know, call for a bit more transparency in it. But yeah, so for the industry, I think it's just promote good whiskey as a whole, not sort of divide it up between good and bad.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping, because we're obviously seeing a huge rise in kind of mixing whiskey. Yeah. Is a huge thing that a lot of other companies are pushing. Johnny Walker and Diageo at large being one of them, but by no means exclusive. And I mean, for me, as we start to look at single malts in mixed drinks more, and then there is that huge push from Johnny Walker on the blended side, and you know, the Johnny Walker talking about their malts as composite parts so much. Hopefully, as kind of single malts come into mixing and blends become, as you say, better educated, so people are better educated on blends. Hopefully, we see this eventual seesaw leveling out. Because let's not forget, it's not that long ago where it was, you know, blends were the height of premium whiskey, and single malts were almost, you know, neglected. Well, they were neglected hugely, and we've gone the other way now. And at some point, I hope this levels out where we can talk about malts, blended grain, single grain, and simply blends all in the same sentence as just whiskey. Because, you know, anyone who's been around whiskey for a while will have tried something from every one of those categories that they adore. And I've got something from every one of those categories within arm's reach of me here that I would happily pour you or any other friend if you came around and have a delicious dram, because as you say, it's all liquid, and hopefully we get to a point where people recognize it as such.
Yeah, absolutely. And going touch on your on grain whiskey. You know, grains can be lovely whiskies as well, but there's sometimes just a hang up on the single the best, and there's sort of you know, there's so much out there, so go and try everything. And you know, that's not to say that some blends are bad and some single malts aren't great either, but you know, just try everything. And you know, as I say, just whiskey as an umbrella, there's so much good stuff out there. So you know, don't pigeonhole yourself to I only drink this. You know, just go out and try things. And yeah, and as you're saying about the craft side, you know, people are now mixing drinks or mixing malts and drinks. It's sort of, you know, the art of the blender. It's just phenomenal, and that's actually, you know, an unsung hero in the whiskey industry. Is, you know, there's a team, they're working with, you know, whiskey in barrels that's it's not consistent, and their skill is to make sure that every time they put it into a bottle it tastes the same. So yeah, the skill of blending is still very much at the forefront of the industry, which a lot of people don't really see, I don't think.
Oh, hugely. At the end of the day, if you're drinking something that's not a single cask, you are drinking something that someone has blended and has needed to oversee. You know, it's not a case of just like every 14 years Clynelish dump, you know, X amount of casks into a vat and then you get Clynelish 14. You know, someone is monitoring those casks, you know, and across every single bottle of whiskey, unless it's literally a single cask. And even then it's been selected by a blender to be a single cask. You know, and I think people kind of forget that blending is literally attached to every single drop of liquid. So, I mean, let's change tack a little bit here. So, I mean, and you've obviously had some, well, I would say, pretty cool and enviable experiences for a lot of us, where you've been part of decision-making processes on how to finish whiskey and how to handle some very good quality whiskey, and you know, going into some very good quality casks, as you've had Palapitada and Amontillado, we've already mentioned, and many others. What's your favorite memory of the kind of whiskey industry since you started? And at what point did you have a kind of epiphany going, this is really cool and I'm only really here because of whiskey?
Oh God, that's a really good question. I mean, I think as you touched on it, being at James Eadie, there's only three of us. So there's Rupert, who's James Eadie's great grandson, and there's Leon, who's sort of the brand director. So he operates everything, and then I'm just the sales manager. But because there's only three of us, that decision making has you know, been an amazing experience. And I think going to the cast finishes, or going to selecting what we're going to do for that range. So we, you know, as you know, we release in September and March every year, and there's always a bit. So when you're in decision making process of the bottling, you're nervous. You don't really know how it's going to be received. You don't know if it's going to sell well, and then, you know, when it goes to the market, and when you see a success in a bottling, or people sort of writing up, oh, that's a lovely mix. So one stands out, and that was our first, I mentioned it before, co-leader to Palapitada. As I said, you know, there was debate around it. We didn't know, you know, where it was going to sit, and we actually released it as our whiskey orange at the Fringe for 1 year. And that immediate feedback of, oh, it's delicious, you know, that's amazing. It was an amazing experience. So as a whiskey experience, that's fantastic, you know, the cast selection. Side of that, even with the small batches, when someone goes, oh, you know, the 3 recharred liquids that we've just done, that's gone out really well. But in terms of sort of just being like, oh, you know, because of whiskey I'm here, it's, I can't really put a finger on it. I think, you know, I get to travel around places. So going to the Netherlands and seeing the whiskey crowd out there, that's pretty phenomenal, and the enthusiasm they have out there, and then working with these, you know, in different countries, and their enthusiasm. You go to these great venues and these great events, and you're going, wow, this is what, you know, this is whiskey around the world, not just in Scotland, because it's lovely coming up to Edinburgh and seeing you guys and enjoying a dram up there. But when you see the reach of whiskey and it taking me, you know, around the world, yeah, it's pretty special, and that's, yeah, God, this is amazing to work in this industry. So yeah, there's a few of them. There is definitely a few of them, but I would say those two are the ones that sort of stand out.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, as I said, that's an enviable position to be kind of looking at how to, you know, I guess some of us do infinity bottles or kind of little projects at home to be able to look at kind of moving whiskey around to that scale and being part of that process. But, you know, when you say whiskey around the world, and you know, I thought it's been quite a shit year for everyone. You know, I mean, I've been exchanging samples with friends in Australia to do this kind of thing, and we've had some Zoom calls with old friends because you've not been able to come up to Edinburgh as you usually would. I've been doing a weekly thing with a group of idiots as well, where we think we've done 300 samples this year. So, you know, it's kind of, it is the power of whiskey to bring people together kind of across the you know, across town, across the country, across the globe is something I think is always worth bearing in mind. But if I guess the final and the crux of the question is, if you were kind of to be flung so far as to be on a desert island and not able to communicate with the rest of the whiskey world, what 3 drams would you want to take with you? I'll recap the rules. So it's 3 bottles of whiskey, so 3 different drams. The bottles do refill forever, so you know there's no budget involved. So if you want to take a 1950s Bowmore, even if there's only 1 bottle left in the world, it will be refilling for you forever. So in that sense, what's your 3 drams that you want to have with you to keep you going?
Oh yeah, I had a thought about this because I haven't tried, you know, old whiskies. I don't think I've tried a whiskey from the 60s before, or I might have had a small sample. So sort of my range, I don't know the sort of, I've never tried 1975 Ardbeg, which, you know, a lot of people say is fantastic. So I've got quite a basic whiskey palate. So I'm going to go for nostalgia over quality. And I think for me, my first one would be the James Eadie Trademark X, as I mentioned before. It's the first whiskey I ever sold. So when I first joined, we were exclusive with Royal Marlborough, the single malt. So the only whiskey I could sell was the blend. So that was sort of a baptism of fire coming into the industry and selling that. And as I said, it sort of opened up the world of blending to me. And it's a whiskey that, you know, I love and has played a big part in my career already. And then I'm going to go for peat. I think I'm going to mix up, so I've got a blend. For peat, I was torn because I love Caolila, but actually the whiskey that sort of got me into whiskey was Talisker 10-year-old. I know you're going to completely disagree with that because I know you don't like Talisker, but for me, that was the whiskey that I was like, you know, when you look at a glass, you go, oh, what's that? You know, solid essence of smoke. It's got sort of coming into your mouth, and flavors, the explosion of flavors were unbelievable. And then, so I started at the peaty end. I tried sherry cask whiskey until I moved to the whiskey shop in Oxford. And one that I remember when I first tried from sherry cask whiskey that I tried, and it sort of really just mind as well, was the Glendronach 18. So I think because I've got a nice sherry cask whiskey there, I've got a very sort of well balanced blend, and then a smoky. Is it only 3, or can I chuck in another?
Just 3, yeah. It's pretty generous.
Yeah, so I'll be with those 3. As I said there, I haven't really had the chance to try all these amazing sort of old whiskies, but I think for what those 3 whiskies have sort of introduced me to, I think those would be my ones, and I can happily sit back and enjoy those, sip those. But yeah, so I think I can see, is that the 18 behind you on your shelf of the Glendronach?
No, that's the 15.
That's the 15. So I thought you had it there. I was very jealous.
Yeah, no, I did a live one of these with Andy Gemmell, and we actually spoke. I think we did a quick recorded one as well. But a friend of mine gave me a bottle of 18-year-old Glendronach for it. There was a single cask from '92, Oloroso cask. So it's basically like the 18, but on steroids. And yeah, that's a desert island dram for me for sure. There's no way I'm going to that island without a Glendronach anyway.
Yeah.
But it's funny, you know, you say you went for nostalgia or whatnot, but I think this might be the 19th episode of this. So on paper, we've had 60 drams talked about. There's maybe been 3 or 4 have been seriously, like, no longer available, hard to get, expensive drams. Everyone kind of picks things that mean something to them, that are kind of easy to come back to, because, you know, that's what whiskey means to a lot of us. It's a dram that, you know, there's nostalgia and there's, you know, all that kind of thing. And it's, you know, it's like music. You like what you like, and because of when you heard it and what you experienced when you did. So it's interesting. That's the recurring theme of this, is that even people who have tried all the whiskey in the world with an unlimited budget still just want something that kind of means something to them.
Yeah, it just shows you that how sort of emotive whiskey is. You've got great memories of it. As I said, so Rupert loves Lefroy because he used to work for Beam, and you know he went to the distillery the whole time, and he would have Lefroy at the distillery, and so for him it would always be his favourite sort of whiskey. And then that's probably the same with me and Talisker 10. That was the first whiskey that sort of really opened my eyes to the industry. And then I remember before I worked at the shop, I just thought all whiskey was smoky because, you know, my dad drank Lagavulin 16. So that's what I used to steal when I was a teenager as well. And then to find out that there isn't just peat. And because I can name a few. I mean, the Glenfarclas 10-year-old was a fantastic space that I first tried as well. And then Ben Riach 10 as well. So working around the palate and then going to that 18, that just pure sherry cask. It was absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, so I think I'm very happy with those three, to be honest.
I think it's a very nice
60 grand bottle of whiskey. Survival with, and
exactly.
You're not going that far, are you?
Drop on the only rock on the island. Right. Well, I mean, thanks so much for your time, man. And of course, Happy New Year. Let's hope this one's a better one. Surely kind of.
God, yeah, we're in 2021 now, aren't we?
Officially, yeah. I mean, I think this is somewhere that was mid-December, but you know, for all those watching, it's 2021.
It's 2021.
So yeah, and well, great to see you, man. And then surely soon enough you'll be up here and we can actually go for a pint and go see us and do this in person. But
I want my kind of tenants. That's what I want.
I mean, so do I, and I fucking live here.
Yeah.
But
so I want my half and half tenants and a dram.
Tenants and a dram. I've just poured the Glenord PX cask finish that you kindly sent up to me because you just kept talking about sherried whiskey, so I figured I should. So I'm going to cheers you with that, man. It's been lovely to talk to you. And
cheers. Thanks very much for having me on.
Mate, a pleasure. And Happy New Year to all. Thanks to everyone for continuing to watch and support Whiskey and Cynicism. And please check out James Eadie's bottlings when you do see them, because they are obviously well curated, well selected, and yep, delicious, can confirm. But also, you know, part of the industry and reasonably priced and kind of trying to just bring good whiskey to people who want to drink it. So, which is very, very important, I think, in an industry that doesn't always provide that. So,
what's your saying every time we go on a sale? What's your saying?
Yeah, it's a lot of whiskey for that money.
Thanks very much, mate, and Happy New Year to everyone out there.
Pleasure, man. Take care. Cheers.